My intention is to answer an intelligent question I've heard a few times about the Mandela Effect, which some call the Mandela Effect, but that's less representative. And to understand it, it will help you to know what a local minimum is. It's a math term. If you don't know what it is, just pause this for a moment and do an internet search and find out what that is. Now here's a trend I've seen while watching YouTube videos on the Mandela Effect. Lots of videos saying, oh my God, we're all going to die, the world is ending because Kit Kat doesn't have a dash. Just ugly, neurotic nonsense. But increasingly lately, I'm finding the people making some of the best content are handling it more intelligently and saying, well, things are changing, but why? And when I look at rainbow trees and a lot of other things, I think, well, maybe things are actually getting better. We have entered what you might call a new age, and we need a new world. And the Mandela Effect is creating that. And so I've seen a lot more people making this recognition. And I have seen a lot more people, lately especially, saying this Cern stuff is nonsense. There's no way it can be Cern. This is a more subtle effect, has a greater sense of harmony to it. May not always make sense on the surface, but it has a greater sense of that all the pieces are fitting together, even if it's not obvious how yet. And so increasingly people are saying, one, this makes sense. Two, it's getting better. Three, relax and breathe. Try and enjoy some of the silliness. Four, it's not Cern. And five, it seems like a time traveler is doing this. And all those things are right. Making these changes involves making changes in the past. And there are intelligent questions about how could a time traveler move Australia. Let's leave those questions aside for now and answer a simpler question. The obvious question, probably most of you can think of it already. If someone went back in time, like in Back to the Future, and ran over a tree at the Twin Pines farm, when he got back, he would find that the Twin Pines Mall has become the Lone Pine Mall. And everybody who goes there will say it's always been the Lone Pine Mall, because it has. So why are you remembering the Dash and Kit Kat, or Mickey's suspenders, or Pikachu's tail? I mean, this is a really obvious question. Why are you remembering it? And you don't have to know. But maybe it will help some people to have an idea of how this is possible. Time is a self-correcting process. There's this tube, this stream of time running along, like a river floating in the multidimensional space, and you move along it. You're born into it, you move for a bit, you die. This is how it works. Now, if you were to go back and change one thing, a small thing or a big thing, it wouldn't matter. What would happen is there would be a ripple through the time stream. Right? This stream isn't magically being created as you make your decisions. The mathematics is more complicated. Your decisions change things, yes, but that happens across time. And if you think, I haven't made this decision yet, what about free will? You're getting caught up in this limit idea of time you live in. But when you can stand back and look at time not as a tiny little moment and lots of unknown future and lots of boring past, if you can see the time as a whole stream and work with the whole stream, you can understand this a little better. So you make that tiny change in the past, and everything after it in the time stream changes. Sort of a wave of change propagates through it. And if you make a random change. As it's propagating through, it's hitting other things and bouncing back and canceling itself out until the change you've made is undone. Right? This time channel has to pass through, it always has to sit in a kind of local minimum. And if you shift it, you have to shift it in such a way that it finds a new local minimum to sit in. If you make just a random change, think of, the ball on the graph kind of math thing. It's like putting the ball somewhere halfway up the slope and it will just roll back down to where it was. In order to make a change work, you need a few things. And I suppose it doesn't matter if I talk about those things, because not like anybody's going to repeat it. But you need to shift the time stream to a new local minimum. You need initial, meaning recent memory or slight, near future, anchor point. And you need the anchor point in the past when it's changed. Right? If that doesn't make sense, I apologize. It's the best I've got at the moment. So you find an anchor point in the past and an anchor point in the future. And then you strike that string that you've put tight between these two, and it makes a tone. And if the tone is the right length, if the string is the right length, the tone will vibrate back and forth like a guitar string. If it's the wrong length, and you try and strike that tone, it will cancel itself out, propagating back and forth. Right? So you need those two endpoints. You need the right tone. You need to move that time stream to a new local minimum. All of those things are necessary. Right? So what I have been doing, and if it bothers you when I say I'm doing it, what somebody's been doing is going back and making very careful changes to jump the time stream to the next level, the next local minimum, step by step by step, heading towards a world where we want to live. To make that, the initial point of change has to be very precise, and the place in history where the change is made and what's changed have to be made very precise, so that this change isn't just cancelled out by time itself, which is a self-healing process. Right? So someone's doing these things, right? Making these very specific changes. And what happens is, when those two endpoints are placed and the string tied between them, right, that string is there because the person in the present is reaching back in the past. It's their lifeline or whatever, like a scuba diver. When that's struck, that tone starts vibrating back and forth. And anybody in the present, or which in that the end point of that, the local point of that string, who's a little more sensitive, a little more aware, can hear these tones vibrating back and forth. You've been wondering about the ringing in your ears. Well, here you go. Right? You're hearing this tone vibrating back and forth as the change is made. And eventually it will settle into a stable tone, and that change will be made in such a way it can propagate forward, and those two endpoints can be removed. Right? So we're talking about information, we're talking about data, about math. Essentially making the initial change and the final change is creating a mathematical process between the two, which you can see as a wave and hear as ringing in your ears. Once it's made and it's solid, that can be taken away, and that change will propagate down through the time, whether it's 40 years or 40,000. It will propagate down. And so people who are a little more aware, they're hearing that tone, that ringing in their ears, the sense of it, and it's allowing them to sense the change as it happens. And so they can remember what it used to be and what it is at the same time. Not everybody and not all the changes, but you can get some of them if you're paying attention. People who aren't that little bit more aware, who really believe that your world's just a hunk of rock floating in a vacuum around the sun, or maybe flat as a pancake and floating around the sun or something. People who believe it's a simple physical only thing don't have access to that higher awareness, can't hear the tone. And so they've got to wait until the change propagates forward. And so when it gets to them, they say, it's always been that way. I think you're crazy. I want to debunk what you're saying. Right? Now, I don't know if that makes any of this clearer, but at least it's an effort to make a very simplistic sort of your 3D world kind of example of what's going on in 6 or more dimensions while the shifting's happening. These two endpoints, the tone, the right tension between them, the right note, and this propagation across time. So yes, it's a time traveler doing this. It's somebody meddling with the time stream. Somebody's changing history and creating a different now. And what happens is that tone comes along and some of you notice it. Right? And that tone doesn't hit a single moment. Obviously, we're working across time. There's a kind of normal distribution of its effect spread out. And so there could well be someone in that time who remembers the old way and makes a picture or a Simpsons episode or something that copies the old way. And so when you look and say the Simpsons is still getting it right and, the Wizard of Oz is now getting it wrong, or at least changed, this is why. There was someone sensitive influencing it. But as that wave propagates through, right, as the past grows through to the present, eventually that change will cement in, and that will be the only reality that exists. It's only in the transitioning stage that you feel this dizziness, this, time shifting, this lack of control, this sense of distortion because things aren't what you remember. That's because you're working at a higher level. If you want it to stop, go back to believing the world is simple and physical and nothing else. Shut down those higher senses, and for you it will have stopped, though it's still going on, because you won't be hearing the tones. Does that make sense? Also, that tone struck on that string is struck for a reason. It creates what you can call a resonant frequency, bouncing back and forth. And so it induces that resonant frequency into the time stream, and that wave will propagate through time. Right? Even when those two endpoints are taken away, that wave propagates. Right? Back and forth. Until it, weaving in more and more change until it stabilizes. So at any given point in that time stream, 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago, as that wave's passing, someone who's a little more sensitive may say, wait a minute, I have a sense that this used to be different. Because they're feeling the wave of it passing through and not just looking at history. It's like electrons moving in a wire to create electricity. Electrons don't actually crawl down the wire. If they did, it would be very slow. The electricity jumps from electron to electron. It's this wave of electricity moving down a stable, say, copper wire, and the copper electrons aren't all peeling off and flying down there at the speed of light. There's some jostling, but they're mostly staying stable. Right? It's like that. There's this wave of energy moving through. And if you have a little higher level awareness, if you're not convinced the world's just boring and physical, then you can hear this, you can feel this wave. And it explains, for those of you who have experienced the nausea, it's like an earthquake going on underneath that most people can't sense. Things that seemed solid before are vibrating. If you look at the surface of the land in an earthquake, it actually makes these beautiful sinusoidal waves. It's not just crack, the world breaks and you're done. The ground will actually dance like waves on water. And so you're feeling this wave moving through time and space and thinking, wow, this is really weird, even though you're not seeing anything around you changing. It looks solid, but you feel this and you get nauseous. You hear this ringing in your ears. You feel dizzy, you feel confused, you feel out of place, or the world's out of place because it's vibrating all over around you. Yeah? And you don't have to have this. You can make yourself simple, forget the more important stuff in life, and live comfortable and pretend it's not happening and it won't bother you as much. But for those who can sense this, it's an amazing time. This is likely the only time in the history of this world that this will happen. And this is happening to repair some damage that happened a very long time ago and put the earth back to where it should have been, with less hairy people. Well, the former generations, Homo habilis, Neanderthal, whatever, would have propagated forward and you'd all look like monkeys now. You wouldn't have tails. See, but there are some changes, and one of those is that people are less hairy. It doesn't matter. It's not important. What matters is here's what's happening, this wave vibrating from a change that's made. And hopefully this answers why are we remembering it if a time traveler did it a long time ago. And the other thing it will answer is for those of you who are afraid. Well, if somebody's just going around making changes at random, they could screw everything up. No, time will heal itself. If they're making changes at random, if time travel's ever invented, they make changes at random, they'll screw things up, create little earthquakes in time, and it will have to go back and heal itself. And if they do it again, time's going to realize the only way it can heal itself is to stop them from having invented time travel. So when they're 6 and, deciding to go into physics, instead they're going to decide to be a surgeon or a gardener. And time travel won't be invented. Every time it's used wrong, it cancels itself out. Right? So there will not be people going back and making random changes. It takes a huge amount of awareness, a lot of understanding in a lot of different dimensions to make one of these time changes happen. And I've been watching. There's nobody else I've seen meddling with time. So if somebody tells you they're from 2049 and they know the future, they're wrong. They may be having an echo of a memory of something that will happen, like remembering a past lifetime but in the future. They may have echoes or memories of it, but they are not time traveling. This isn't happening. Time doesn't allow it.